Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today is a guide to give you all the right tips and essentials to help you improve on Invisible Woman. No matter your rank, this guide will help you build the right fundamentals. Everything is timestamped, and let's begin. So let's discuss why play her. What makes Invisible Woman interesting is the fact the line in which she can heal can also do damage and push through multiple enemies, unlike Cloak and Dagger where you need to switch forms. But also like Jeff, you can knock people off the map and really embody the meaning of Strategist and pull off some insane plays. It's why she's my favorite healer, but remember to be flexible, to be able to play other healers in different situations. Overall, countless times I have gotten MVP in ranked and pulled more than my weight in heals and damage. She reminds me of playing a disciplined priest in World of Warcraft, and she's incredibly versatile. Another reason why she's incredibly versatile and I enjoy playing her is that even though I may not be able to get DPS, at least it can add a lot to the team, and it's why I've already hit Lord on her. She's amazing, she's a lot of fun. So let's get into the best settings for Invisible Woman. Here are my recommendations when it comes to settings for Invisible Woman. You'll notice right off the rip that I went to accessibility. The reason why is I personally find it easier for ally colors to be green and enemy health bars to be red. This is just personal preference, but I need things to stick out visually. So this is the settings that I definitely utilize. You can also change your specific settings for Invisible Woman. You click on this and you go to her. There's nothing exactly crazy. I would just say the biggest thing is the range hint. I don't know if that's on by default, but I have turned it off. It can help you, especially when you're trying to get that range. Like we have mentioned, it is 30 meters. That'll be later in the video. Now also the healing reticle feedback, so you know when you're healing versus when you're damaging, because you could also miss, so you need to know when you're hitting. I've turned this off. Over time you'll get used to this, but it's also recommended. I also have allied health bars on all the time, so I can see where everyone's health is. You can adjust the visibility of allied health bars, so that's pretty much what it means. I have it on. It's pretty much on by default, I'm pretty sure, but I just went on just to turn it on overall. Now in terms of overall settings, I turn these into what feels most comfortable for me. You'll notice my melee is on X. That's partly because when I played World of Warcraft, it was one of the buttons I hit a lot when using my thumb. I put Q and E just so it's really close to W as I'm moving around, and it just adds that ability. And then of course I have F and then my ultimate, which is V, because that's what my ultimate was on Apex Legends. So I tend to gravitate towards what feels best and what feels comfortable there. Those are pretty much all the settings. This is my sensitivity setting here at 0.65. I do use mouse acceleration, so there is that. You can turn these settings off, whatever's going to help you get a general. You don't have to be exact. Remember, you don't have critical hits when it comes to Invisible Woman, so you don't have to be like perfect with your science, but the idea is that you're being smart about the bounce back effect, which we'll also discuss here in a minute. But that is all the settings I can think of. If you want more settings, I definitely cover them in a beginner's guide. I can put them down in the description for you if that is helpful. So let's get into the next piece. Now, before we go into the next bit, something that a lot of healers have been utilizing is going to audio, scroll all the way down and do voiceover subtitles. This will help you know whenever you see that ultimates are being utilized. I have it on large. I put the text on red so I can see it. If you play World of Warcraft, it works as like a raid boss thing where it tells you something is incoming, because sometimes there's so much audio clutter that you need a second to look down and see that something is going on or an ultimate did go out. Just a little helpful tip that can also help you as well, especially if for really any healer. Now for some, this part may be less interesting. We're going to break down each ability for beginners. Now, of course, we'll be sure to add various tips to help you also go to the next level to intermediate and advanced. So just a reminder, you have a base of 275 HP, so a bit more than the normal squishy DPS, but also the downside of Invisible Woman is you don't have too much momentum besides your run and your jump forward. I think it's important to still know the stats in the back of your head so you know exactly what you're doing, which is the main attack or projection. This will either heal for 40 per hit or damage for 20 per hit. This has a rate of fire of 0.5 per second and a projectile speed of 120 meters per second, meaning it's not the fastest, but not the slowest either. The bounce matters a ton, so here's a tip I would provide. So aiming down towards the floor can also help hone in on your targets, better than waiting for the bounce back. You don't benefit from criticals, so that's why I recommend this pretty amazing tip. Its weakness is the fact that it's only 30 meters max, so that's why I say imagining your line of sight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into empty server on Midtown, and I want to explain the LOS and how that works, but also the downside, especially if you're healing a flyer. Let's say, for example, Iron Man or Storm. So let's get into that. Now, before we go into Midtown and discuss that 30-meter range, the best way to look at her heals is when it bounces off of a wall and where you're looking. So let's say this is Invisible Woman right here, and she's throwing. Yeah, she's going to keep throwing in different directions, but if you look at another area and you're trying to get a flyer here and where they're at, your shield can be more effective. So what you're really looking for, if you have, let's say, a few people here, is that you'll be more effective by using your 30-meter range here and then using your shield for outliers that happen to be around. So I'm going to highlight over this because this is also a friendly, and over here as well. Just kind of like we're having to manage as well. Again, convoy matches are going to be your best friend, but when we discuss this in Midtown as you're pushing, you're essentially looking for those lines, and when we look for those, especially in domination, is a lot harder when everyone's kind of running around. Try to back up and find that middle space. There's like that little, I would almost call it your little bubble. It's funny, especially coming from Invisible Woman. The little bubble and sweet spot where you're going to find a lot of success. And even as I'm doing it, the more I do it, the more consistent I become, especially as a healer, compared to others where their range is a lot further compared to, let's say, Luna, where it's like infinite. You can just kind of like DP, you know, hit anybody in DPS and also heal at any range. Where Mantis, you only need to do a quick look versus any other healer. She has her own specific skill set when it comes to looking for that radius and bubble you're at, but also can be really detrimental if you're too close or too far. You'll see that in current theme in today's guide. Let's go into Midtown. Let's discuss this. Now, the reason why I'm showing Midtown is a lot of maps that are in very close, tight places, especially where enemies really line up, is going to be your strength. Where you start to have weaknesses, as we discussed earlier by showcasing line of sight, is where enemies start to really spread out, or even friendlies for that matter. So you really benefit by being behind the tanks, but you don't want to be too close because then you overextend, but you also don't want to be too far away. So let's find that balancing act. So we're going to kind of discuss that in the positioning here. What we're going to do is we're going to work dynamically through attack. So a really great example is just outside the door is where you're hitting, and you see how far that is. As you start to position, now the biggest weakness is that you can heal your friendlies here at this angle, but realize that most of the time, unless they're stacked up, you're only going to hit a few, especially if they're positioned this way. Now, the ideal position, especially if you're right behind Doctor Strange, is that you are positioned right behind him and then behind everybody to get everyone in a single line. Now, let's say you saw an Iron Man, then you would flick and then get the shield up, or if somebody was over here, you put a shield, heal them up, and you know your range. Now, the best thing you can do is you have people overextend positioning, you slow, and then you pull in. And as you pull in, that usually creates a moment where you can stack on top of them, your friendly could be able to dive, and so forth, and you start moving forward. Now, the hard part is, when we talk about this line, is that she really benefits by being towards like the mid to back line, like almost not in the front, but also not the back. But if you start doing stuff like this, while it's great for a flank, remember, how many people are you getting in that line of sight? It really benefits if you got 1, 2, and 3, and there's 2 people here without a Doctor Strange, then you're just going It's the best example in audio I can give where everything starts tackling and building up on one another. So you want to look for those lines. If you are in front of your tank, you run the risk of being overextended. A Bucky will grab you, somebody will grab you. If you are too far behind, then you're not able to reach everybody. So that sweet spot, like right here, that's a nice sweet spot. Sweet spot using cover as you start to maneuver and get in. And of course, like I said, you don't mind using flanks and using angles, because remember, if you aim down, it kind of helps with this, especially if somebody gets you with a Groot ult, then you could say like, oh gosh, we're stuck, but then you put, let's say, a shield here, and then you aim down to get that area effect as much as possible, rather than aiming forward, because remember, it takes a second to travel. But if it's right here, it's going to be a little faster, so it kind of increases that time there, just ever so slightly. That's why I recommend just kind of aiming down on the floor, just to kind of bounce it back. But that's also why, as you're chasing somebody, it can be dangerous when you're doing this, and then you pull, and then you slow. It's great to do that, but make sure to reposition. All right, that's the best tip I can provide when it comes to pushing forward. And just remember that line, just like the visual that we saw at the very beginning. So I'm only reinforcing it just because you want to find that sweet spot. Just make sure that you have as many people in front of you. I always go with the number of like 3 to 4, ideally. So the issue is that if somebody's behind you, you usually lose track of them. Ideally, you have like 3 or 4, and there's just like one healer or somebody here that you just need to look at, and then you have a flyer. Now, if you have 2 flyers, that's going to kind of suck. I would say the ideal is just to focus on the 3 and then just kind of heal when you can and keep an eye on them and just back up. But remember, if you have dive, you're going to have to push forward, and that's when you start using techniques. Let's say, you know, you got a Spider-Man, you pull him back in, and then you go invisible, and then hopefully you have somebody to help you out. But we'll break down even more of this as we discuss more of the abilities. So let's go and segue back to Guardian Shield, because I know we're kind of skipping around just a little bit with some of these tips. Next is Guardian Shield. When someone runs through this, it gives a 30% slow rate. You can recall it back and has a healing range of 3 meters, but you can block 300 damage. Notice that I say that its healing is actually better than your normal heal, which is at 50 per second. It's insane. So that's something to be mindful of. Now, the downside is you cannot cast this on yourself, but here's a really helpful tip. Be smart of where you place it. If you put it near a friendly, technically you can stand near it and heal yourself. You can use it to top yourself off. If you put it near a wall, you can hide it, for an example, and maybe block it from being an LOS of an enemy. But also, it can be great great for blocking with, let's say, a Punisher. A Punisher can definitely benefit from the extra shielding as well. Now, you may think, okay, well, let me put it on a tank, but sometimes you're going to miss out on the healing. So be selective and be smart of where you put it. There's not a right and wrong here, but perhaps you say, well, my tank, let's say Doctor Strange is doing a great job, and I have an Iron Man flying around. Well, it's probably best to put on Iron Man just so you can get topped off quickly, especially because I cannot reach him that fast with my healing, or I am at the risk of missing my heals. Just another helpful tip. Now, another one, which is also fantastic, is remember that this does have 6 seconds to gain it back. And one thing that people forget is you can recall it. Let's say you throw it up for that quick heal just to give that maybe 2 seconds. That's 100 healing already, and then you make it disappear. At least you don't have to wait for the full gain back of 6 seconds. So that's another helpful tip. Now, next up, the ability that is really powerful is Psionic Vortex. It's slow at 80 meters per second, but the one tip is you can hit the same button and stop it mid-air. So you don't necessarily need to be exact. In fact, if you're trying to hit someone who is flying, you aim slightly below and it'll start to tank them to the ground. This has a slow effect and damages at 35 damage per second. It is very strong, and paired with your normal DPS, the push or pull to get them back in, we're looking at a great damage spike. That's why I say she's great with damage. She's like the makeshift Bucky to pull in an opponent, which we'll discuss in a minute. This makes great for handling enemies, dive characters that are trying to melee you, and just great for living overall. Great anti-dive. Not perfect, but also really great. Now, next up is force physics. That push or pull that we're talking about, that's so vital to being a good invisible woman. This is great to assassinate enemies who are trying to run away. You can pull them in to catch somebody out. You can knock them off the map. You can put them in unfavorable positioning, or perhaps you're pushing away an ultimate ability. So let's break down a clip where we're pushing away somebody using their ultimate, such as, let's say, Doctor Strange. Now, in this clip, I just want to give an example of the force push working ideally to push a Doctor Strange who is going to use Eye of Agamotto. So you see there, they come up and you push them away, and it pretty much blocked from going right on top of all of us there. So let's go and replay that. Where I've done this many times before, is that what you're doing is you're trying to save that force push. That's what I was kind of waiting for specifically, whether you're pushing away a dive and they're about to go right on top of you, literally right on top of both healers, would have smacked us both up pretty heavily there. And where you can see in ranked where we're talking about those lines where I'm able to keep the damage up and kind of be mid-range. Now, it'd be ideal to have most of our DPS there, and of course we do get eliminated, but it does save time, and that's really what you're looking for. So when you go back and we look at all these clips right here, we held for a really long time just pushing forward, and like you see how all this damage right here, this is just so much free damage, just being able to spike and then backing up to find your spacing. So remember to kind of find that spacing, find that positioning. You know, again, you're not going to be perfect. I'm not perfect. There's always moments you can improve, but look for those bigger moments of what you're countering, whether it is a push or anything of that nature. So let's keep on going with the video. All right, now in this portion, what we're going to discuss is Invisible Boundary. Invisible Boundary, I would always say, is not ideal to be the first one to cast it down because it does take a second, and you can go as fast as you can and press your ultimate and throw on the ground, but it does have an activation time. Remember, if you get eliminated, that'll disappear. So just make sure, just like Invisible Woman does disappear, her ultimate will go with her, which is unfortunate. It does 165 healing per second. The slow duration is 1 second, and the pass-through slow rate is 55%. Now, this has a duration of 8 seconds. You can see it on screen, so communicate with your teammates to let them know, hey, 5, 4. It's not the longest one, but my tip is if a Cloak and Dagger has done about 2 jumps forward, my recommendation after the fact is to wait for 2 of those. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's go ahead and just grab her, and so you can see. If she does at least 2 of them, it should line up. So let's see, you got 1, 2. It lines up pretty close with it afterwards because, you know, in terms of timing, it's not exact, but it'll be pretty close. So just wait for 2 of the dashes, then throw your ultimate if you're trying to stack it over, and then that kind of leaves a little bit of leeway there. That's another little tip. I've done that multiple times because if you do it right away when you see Cloak and Dagger push forward and you go like this, then she's going to have a lot more uptime, and it's important to kind of gauge that time frame as best as you can. This does have height, so this is great for flyers. This is great paired with, let's say, Wanda using her ultimate, which you're not going to see much at the higher levels. But let's say, for example, you got anybody else who needs to be healed up in the air. Let's say somebody more meta like Storm or Iron Man, especially if they're paired with Hulk. There's definitely that massive power behind it. If you have, let's say, for example, a good maybe suggestion for an ultimate is if you pop it. Now, these guys are just pointing in one direction, but at least you're invisible to, let's say, a Punisher who's ulted far away. Now, doesn't mean he can't just spray and pray, but at least he's not hitting you. So that's something to be mindful of just being invisible and using that. I find it very beneficial to use her to push forward, to create space, almost kind of like a Groot wall at times. So if you need that space and you know they're about to ult or do something, that can be very, very powerful. Let's say you want this space over here, then you ult it and occupy that space, and then you can kind of mess around with the edge here and start pulling people in, isolating them out, and slowing them. And it's really strong against melee characters. I'd really advise against using it on yourself to counter dive, because you should be able to counter dive as an invisible woman. But if you do need to use it for some odd reason to save yourself that way, then I guess you could pop it just to keep yourself alive just a little bit longer. But you should definitely use it against heavy hitters such as like Star-Lord's ultimate. Moon Knight is definitely going to be a strong ultimate against you. So will Iron Man, but at least popping it, at least you can try to hide and guess where he might not throw. It's strong against Bucky, strong against Psylocke. But there's certain ultimates, like let's say Groot, strong against Magneto. If he throws it in there, may get you strong against Thor. So there's a lot that you can counter, so try to be selective with what you counter. And sometimes, again, that cast time, you got to do it really fast if you see it. So essentially, it's like you got to pretty much throw it down, even faster than that. I would say I was a little slow on that. You want to be able to, press ult and just click as fast as possible to throw it down. I can't tell you how many times I have thrown this down and I was just like a second too late. So you got to be like that fast. There you go. And so come in here, practice that, because it needs to be that quick. Because if it's not, I promise you, you're going to get screwed, and you need to anticipate better. You can also counter by anticipation. So let's go into the next thing. While I have you here, we're going to talk about Covert Advance, because that's really easy. I just passively went invisible. It heals you for 20 heals per second. That's why I recommend using the shield. Say, for example, I were to get hit, because waiting around this long to go invisible sucks. So the best thing you can do, let's say, for example, one of your teammates does get hit. So you get hit a little bit more right here. And then your teammates get hit. You throw the shield. You heal up. You pull it back. That's just a good example of just the shield. You put it up. Hide behind it. There you go. At least it can heal you up, and then you pull it away, and then you're back at 300 just because of that time frame. So it's something to be mindful of. Also, Veiled Step is a great way, especially if you get dived like we were showing. Somebody dives you, put Psionic, you pull them in, you try to do a little bit of damage, you notice they're only at half, you go invisible, and then boom. The other thing I like to do, whether it's helpful or not, somebody's going to have to comment down below. Usually what I like to do with the Veiled Step, and you can practice this, you can turn this setting in the practice settings and go to no ability cooldown and keep practicing it, is I like to keep the momentum afterwards and keep bouncing. Especially if you're like on a slope. It's going to showcase an example. I don't know if it's actually faster like that. It gives you a little bit of speed boost. I started been wondering if you, because I've been seeing the Hulk movement tech that you can do, if you could time this to the point where you might be able to gain some more leverage off of it and go with a bit bigger bounce. But I always recommend I do that. I try to do like a bunny hop. I think it helps. If I'm crazy, I'm crazy. Somebody will comment down below. But I like the fact that it keeps some forward momentum afterwards. But it just depends on like the surface you're bouncing off of specifically. That's why I say downhill. If you hit the edge of a thing, then it looks like it can propel you. I've done it before further. I wish I had an example, but that's just my recommended there. And of course, your team up, which is also, I wouldn't say strong, but is decent. It does give you a 15% increase if you are paired with Reed Richards, which is the Fantastic Force, which is, I guess, beneficial. You got Reed Richards there, so there's that benefit. The other thing is your melee combo. So I'll give the example. You smack around a little bit. I'm going to eliminate Luna there. But what you can do with this combo, because the third hit does a push and pull back in just to kind of juggle them around or push away, depending on what you want to do with it. It's a great combo to kind of learn, especially if somebody's on you and you keep pushing further. Look at that. You gain a little bit more speed. It's just a little bit, but it's a little combo to work on. It juggles them around. It confuses the heck out of them. It's a lot of fun. So work on that if you want. I've had that helpful. Let me give an example. If you have everyone who's ulted on top of you, have an ult, and then you can try to push them out of that ultimate, whether it's a Mantis ult, Luna ult, or even a Invisible Woman ult. It can be helpful to say, oh wait, they're still in the ult, push them off, and then practice that and get them off the point, or whatever you're trying to do. Or let's say, for example, there's a million ults that are going off, like we had mentioned. Let's say we have a Luna ult, Mantis ult, we got Loki, who's also ulted with Cloak and Dagger ult. It all exists over here, and you're trying to just push somebody off the point because nobody is dying. Well, that's the way you're going to do it. Boom, boom, and then boom, we pull them back in, or, vice versa, slap, slap, and back and forth. This does 35 per hit. So here you go again, boom, boom, and then push further. Lot of space there. So single people out of who you think you can push off, but also this can be beneficial to pushing people off the map. So lots of little tips in there that I recommend practicing. Practice a little combo. It's a lot of fun, and you'd be surprised what you can pull off with it. All right, so now let's get into the next section. So what I'm going to set up next is probably the hardest exercise that you're going to need to learn when it comes to Invisible Woman. So what I would recommend is hitting such as like a Storm or Iron Man and have them within, let's say, a fixed, you know, put it at random. You just put mid-range to short range, but you want them to fly vertical and move around horizontal. So we're going to put that at random, and you want their movement speed to be just decent, pretty quick, and we're going to turn off the music there. So the exercise I want to teach here while you're in the range, and you can just be down here, I've talked about this multiple times, is that you want to practice that lead, especially when you're trying to hit somebody, right? Especially when they're moving fast, it can be really annoying, but this will help you get used to that movement velocity. I suggest moving with it, and then also not moving with it. So if you're standing still, right, it gets you used to hitting a flyer. If you can hit a flyer, then you're pretty much set. You see, notice how far I need to lead. I guess the best tip is looking like at the extension of the crosshair. Realistically, what I probably should do with my crosshair, and this is all another important tip, is to make the circle, let's go into settings here, is make the outside just a little bit wider. So if we go to advanced, and let's go down to crosshair length. Okay, there's so many settings when it comes to crosshairs, so it took me a second to find that. It's the center gap when you expand under details here. It's a circle radius. I don't know why it took me so long to find, but I've had mine customized. What I recommend, kind of increasing the radius a little bit and mirroring it where you believe you're going to hit. So you see how I'm like at the very edge of the circle? Now it kind of hits a little better. So it kind of gives you like an indicator of where you're going to hit. Look at that. See how it's like, okay, as long as I know that I'm on the edge of that, it can kind of give me a good guidance on where to hit. Remember also, you only have 10 of these. I know I forgot to kind of mention that in the more of the basic tips, but it really helps. You sleep on the crosshair so much. I'll be sure to do a short on that as well. But you see how like as long as you're in that general vicinity, I change these depending on the character, and I've kind of slept on doing it for Invisible Woman. Because remember, it's easier because her radius is only 30 meters specifically. So that can help a whole lot. And I guess the only other one I can recommend is just running over to the targets that are standing here and doing one of two things. Understand what that bounce looks like, but also when they're just kind of running in front of you. Now these don't run, but at least you can kind of aim a little forward. See how you're just in front of the crosshair and just kind of get used to that and what that looks like to kind of hit. You notice that it's got the bounce back once it does hit, but also what I recommend as well, as we just keep bouncing all the way over here, is just line up the targets and know what it feels like when you hear them. Remember how I was mentioning it does all that damage? The damage and potential that Invisible Woman has is pretty insane, but also this is a great visual of understanding what it means just to have a full line right here and what that does for you. And so you can do the same thing when you're over here, because you are healing while DPSing, and you can feel that bounce back and forth. But also you can see where it's a little forgiving also in this spot. So if you're hitting somebody over here, you do have a little bit of leeway based on the hitbox around the target. So it's another helpful tip. All right, so that's what I recommend practicing in the range and then adjusting your crosshair. I'm not gonna lie, I've kind of done my own little homework here and created my own little crosshair to kind of give me a general space where I'm hitting. Because remember, you don't benefit from criticals. So that's a little helpful moment, a helpful tip. And this is exactly 30 meters. So then if you back out from 30 meters, you start to miss. Memorize that distance. All right, let's go into the next section. So what I have decided to do for this guide, which is different from the other one that I did, is we're going to heal in real time. I would go in ranked, but I feel like people stack up easier. So I'm going to showcase the worst example, which is quick play, and doing off the cuff and describe every single ability in real time and showcase, because I don't think people are going to be stacked up at all. I think this is going to be an absolute nightmare. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of every situation. So let's just get right into the beginning of the match, shall we? See how it goes. Also, we kind of looked out with this because we're actually doing domination, which I actually find more difficult. When it comes to the convoy, at least you could stand on the convoy and find more of those choke points. We're going to do domination because it's quite literally one of the worst possible examples of which you can run into with Invisible Woman. Quite literally. I find it much more difficult to find those lines, and we're going to do our best to find them. Let's take a look at our comp. We do have a flyer and we do have a dive, meaning that the only people in front of us are going to be the Doctor Strange, the Bucky potentially, and well, this is going to be a rough comp. Now we could find a line on the right-hand side over here. Specifically, they'll go on the dive and you can kind of stay just a little bit behind them. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to try to throw a Psionic Force over here just to kind of just get a little bit of slowdown, and then I'll heal. Now if a flyer gets hurt, I can pull them in right here. Now, the downside of what I just did there, I didn't realize I had a Magneto. Magneto's a hard dive. I'll go invisible here because they pretty much push with a Black Panther. They're going right back in. Shield the Flyer just to keep her up. Do another Psionic Force. Make sure that she's topped off. She should be almost good. I'll put a shield in front. Kind of heal this front line best we can. Now, the downside as well is that you're going to be bound to miss as well, which also really sucks. I'm going to try to jump over. Unfortunately, push them away. Put a Psionic Force. Go right back. Heal up the Doctor Strange. Put a shield for a second. Pull it down. Put a shield back up. Go invisible because we had a dive. Then I'm going to heal up again. And that's where that really comes in. Remember, you have your pull a lot more than you realize. I can pull this in and then DPS. Now, you don't want to overextend, and that's when I back up, right? That's one trick that Invisible Women tend to do, is that they'll overextend, and that'll be the downside. So we got a Black Panther, one overextended, and the only downside is you kind of have to choose what sucks between what feels like mommy and daddy, especially, like, this is quick play. This sucks, like, having to choose between everyone spread out. And this is, like, Invisible Woman's worst nightmare. I'll pull this guy back in to help. I'll go invisible. They finish them off. I'm going to ult because I almost lost to Doctor Strange. Just quick play. It's really not... I would rather not lose people in quick play. And I pulled back in. There you go. A little more extra damage. Now, this isn't... Like I said, I'm not perfect. And there's a shield to kind of block and slow them. He pulled them in. I could definitely use my pull to push through the Psionic shield. We're definitely overextended now. It's a little rough. It's okay. There we go. I'll pull in right into my Psionic Force. I'll go invisible just to dodge this, and I'll be ready to heal. There's a shield. Top him off. And then I missed a few shots. That's always fun. The beauty of Invisible. I mean, you see memes where it's like, okay, I missed. Like, that sucks. Do a little more damage. Looks like we're not. I'll hold on the Psionic Force for now. Shield Bucky here. Push him away, just in case. Now, they have Doctor Strange ult, probably. I'm going to go invisible, dodge that. Oh, we're overextended like crazy. We knew this, but Doctor Strange is just going to try to probably pop his ult based on the timing. Push him away. I should have saved that. Try to heal up best I can. Reposition. Remember, it's like a sweet spot that you're trying to find. They're all lined up here, which is kind of helpful, but at the same time, you're not God's gift. There's only so much you could do, and then we finally got eliminated. That was our first death. I mean, it is what it is. And I would say, oh, I thought they had a Strange. I guess they switched off of it. That's perfectly fine. Well, then I guess I could have sworn they had a Strange. I guess I'm just speaking out loud. But you kind of see where it's like you're trying to find those lines. I'm backing up. I'm making sure I'm not overextended. We're almost close to winning this. It's not bad. There's a few things I can do a little better, okay? This is where you kind of have to analyze the gameplay. I could find better lines to do more damage. It's really hard, and I'm overextending again just a little bit. Where's our tank? This example is another use of the ultimate. So we wait for 2 of the dives here, and then I know the Magneto is about to come in for an ultimate as well. You'll see that as he's pushing forward. So I see that, and then I pop my ultimate right there to try to go for the spike damage. Luckily, he missed. Honestly, if he threw it right on top of me, he would have hit pretty hard, but also this overlaps kind of nicely, and the pull back in to pull people in who are trying to run away, specifically like Magic, for that slow. What you're seeing there is another Cloak and Dagger that's from their Loki, but it's just another helpful tip. Reminder is that your ultimate placement is really key. And if you don't do it well, then it's going to cost you a lot of games. Trust me. I've done this mistake many, many times, and it's something to really improve and work upon. Here's another example of spacing out ultimate. So I let my Cloak and Dagger go first because hers normally comes up before mine, but we also want to put pressure on the point. I definitely put the slow in front, made sure we were healed up, and then afterwards extend the amount of time that we're pushing forward as the Cloak and Dagger was DPSing and countering the Punisher. Notice how the Punisher left the point and was kind of confused on what to hit. Now, the downside, if he stayed in that, he probably could have gotten a lot of us. But it's just another example of making sure that you throw it in your ultimate, but also pairing with Groot is really strong, especially when they're all on top of it. You can do a whole lot more damage, and that's really, really powerful. Now, this is the last example I'm going to give. Luna has her ult popped. And the biggest thing, because Luna ult does go down, and I see that, I pop my ultimate right on top of everyone just so we can mitigate as much of this damage as possible, because there's a lot of damage going out, and that keeps our forward momentum there. So again, it's extending that time frame, because usually when one healer ult goes down, you'll see it here, you can always assume that there's going to be follow-up damage from like a Bucky to Groot, anything of that nature. That almost always happens, and that's why I like being second, because at least I can anticipate rather than react, because you'll notice that you still have to look down, you still have to click, or you could do as fast as possible, but it tends to be a little rocky being the first one in. So that's just my experience. Another Invisible Woman main can probably anticipate much better than me, but as you get better at it, you know, then you can anticipate what damage damage is incoming. I always find it a little bit better knowing that something is going to come exactly after the first healer ult, and then kind of work from there. And it really helps you build momentum in terms of pushing. And you can see here, even the priority of finding those lanes can be a little difficult, and you're trying to keep everyone up as you can and use those shields and keep recalling it and pulling it back. And one of the biggest downsides if you're facing an enemy Groot is losing LOS of your, you know, of your tank, which can be pretty brutal. I always find Invisible Woman's a little bit stronger as a tank healer rather than trying to heal up people that are running around a million miles an hour. Just another quick tidbit there. Now, if you enjoyed this guide, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'm definitely going to continue improving on her. Definitely reach Lord status with her. She's been a lot of fun. So if you enjoyed this guide, be sure to leave a like, and we'll see you guys all in the next one.